Daniel, Canadians are facing a lot of economic anxiety, uncertainty right now. What's going on across this country at this very moment in time?
Well, right now we're facing very serious threats, economic threats, from our main trading partner, the United States. And I think that consists of tariffs or even more existential threats, as Canadians have learned in the first few months of Mr. Trump's presidency. But the economic threat is the one we need to take very seriously. And I think it's worth remembering that Canadians, even before Mr. Trump was elected, we weren't doing so well either. So incomes were flat. And, at the Howe Institute, so we're a think tank, and our mission is to think of, ideas, look at what's going on, and think of ideas and how we can improve Canadian standard of living. And so we always put out some research and advice towards that mission. But the reality is we weren't doing so well. So we had a lot of work even before the election of Mr. Trump, even before the tariff threat. Investment in Canada wasn't doing so well, so that was hard. It was hard to create good jobs. Affordability was an issue, as we saw independently of what was going on in the United States, as we saw in the recent federal election campaign. So the reality is that Canadians' incomes after inflation have been really flat on average for 5 years. And that was before we were hit with this body blow to our trade. So our trade with the United States is 70% of our total trade. Trade is about a third of our total economy. So we're talking about a lot of jobs and a lot of dollars at risk for our economy. So that's what we're confronting right now. Our governments have been trying to work together, which is not necessarily often the case, to counter that blow and to react to it. And actually, that's one encouraging thing from this. It's like all of a sudden we're almost waking up, and we're trying to solve problems not just with respect to the United States, but what were our problems before that, if we solve them, would help us meet this crisis better.
I think it's a really good point that people are mobilizing. People are taking action. I was reading that at CD Howe, you've launched the Trade Crisis Working Group. What exactly is that group doing right now? So in a time of crisis, and things are shifting, and you can't always rely on what you've done in the past or past thinking. You need some fresh thinking to address the issue at hand. And that's why there's a crisis. And we formed this group, which is very multi-industry, multidisciplinary in terms of experts, and that really helps us understand in real time on the ground, almost literally, how is this crisis unfolding. So there's no point us sitting in our office or looking out the window and saying, well, this is how I think we're going to solve this. So we really need to understand what's going on the ground, and that's what this crisis working group, again, from different industries, goods, services, ports, railways, are how they are living this crisis. And out of those discussions, which are so essential at a time like this, we often emerge, surprising to me even, a consensus about how Canada should react, what we should do. And then, of course, our job is then to convey that consensus to decision makers, so that at least they know that after serious discussions and reflection, and some from a group that reflects a fair amount of the country's economy and different experts, from that group emerge some serious considerations for policymakers. Let's talk about some of these potential actions, in particular when it comes to the United States. You alluded to this already. I think a lot of the anxiety that we're feeling right now, especially when it comes to trade, is due to what's happening south of the border. So what should Canada be doing?
So what's interesting is that in the early days of this crisis, it became really apparent, the broad outlines of what we need to do became really apparent, and a lot of the rest has been tweaking. So from strategy to now more tactics, if you see what I mean. So it became apparent. Now, in a sense, that sounds obvious, but it was actually great to hear people in business say that, and various experts among our group. In a sense, it's obvious. So the first thing is, how do we make them feel the pain? Because what the United States is doing is also not good for the U.S. economy. So Mr. Trump has been very fond of saying and repeating that he doesn't need anything for Canada. They don't need anything for Canada. We know that that's actually not true. They need a lot from us, and if they're not getting it, or if they're making it more expensive by imposing tariffs, that hurts the U.S. economy. Now, the first reaction is, we're going to retaliate. This is how we hurt them. And a lot of people were reacting that way. Now it's a lot more tactical, a little bit of retaliation, a lot of patience. Why? Because in fact, our let's call them our boots on the ground, are actually already active in the United States. It's the consumers that are paying the price. It's the businesses that can't import what they need unless they pay the higher cost of tariffs. So the tactics, if you like, become, well, we need to speak and reach out to that audience with our research that actually, helps their talking point, if you will, and try to influence the White House that way, as opposed to retaliating. So that's one thing. The other thing is obviously, well, okay, this is the end of, we were counting a lot on trade with the United States and on free and open trade with the United States. And we had dodged the bullet a little bit in 2017 during the first Trump presidency. We kept a trade agreement that was pretty good, and we thought he was going to keep it. So I think, let's face it, a lot of Canadian businesses were assuming that. And now that assumption is out the window. So there's two things then in reaction to that. One is, how do we diversify our trade? It's not easy. And the other one is, okay, well, can we go back to some of those issues that we had about kickstarting our own economy to begin with, and actually reinforce our own economy almost like from within? So we were hurt by our own decisions before, not quite realizing it. We had a good time exporting to the U.S. But now it's like, also, how do we strengthen our own economy with our own means, not just looking to the United States? And so those are some of the issues that the broad strategic outlines, if you will, that appeared very early in the discussions of this working group, and the rest has been refining tactics. For example, do we partner? How do we look upon the partnership with Mexico? As a plus in our discussion with the United States, or as a minus? And there were a lot of discussions about that, and we ended up saying it's a plus, because confronting the United States alone is pretty pretty daunting, and I think they're going to take us more seriously together than separately. For example,
what if we move to discussing trade beyond what's happening on this continent? What are some of the opportunities? And I think we're seeing that right now from the current federal government in terms of actually going out and making sure we have better relationships around the world and beyond just North America.
Yes, that's something I would say, that's an aspect, our international relations beyond the United States, that I think, frankly, has been a bit neglected. So we reached, and we have an agreement in place with the European Union, which is great, a trade agreement. Now one with Japan and other TPP countries. So great effort there. We need to do more in that respect. We couldn't reach an agreement with the UK. We're still talking to a major Asian bloc, which is the ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and so on. So that's still evolving. But even though we sign these trade agreements, we need to sign more with like-minded countries. So this is really important to realize that a lot of countries, in fact, like us, would like a more rules-based trading order, as opposed to the destruction of the rules-based trading order that Mr. Trump is clearly aiming for. I think that's fair. But a lot of us, the other 3/4 of the world, would actually like to maintain some order and some more open trade. So we have to work with those countries. I mentioned some of them, but we've also had difficulty
taking advantage of these agreements. You know, so and here you go back to the question is, are Canadians entrepreneurial enough, frankly? Do we commercialize? We have great inventions. Do we commercialize them well? Are we comfortable dealing with customers in different cultures? So all these things, I think we need to look at afresh. It's great that we have these trade agreements. We need more, but we also need to take better advantage of them.
Another thing we need to do a better job of is trade between the provinces. And I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of Canadians who are wondering, why hasn't this really happened yet? There was an agreement about 30 years ago. It seems still very slow moving. So what's happening on that front?
That's right. So I mentioned the angle of reinforcing our own economy from within. And I think we've had a couple of major problems there. One was getting major projects off the ground. That would help our exports and that would help create new jobs and bring more incomes to government, tax revenues. And the other one is, and it's somewhat related, is how do we work together to create a stronger, more unified national economy? And that gets to the question, of course, of interprovincial trade as such, not necessarily national projects, although they each have their regional dimension, and we have quarrels over them along regional and provincial dimensions as well. But the question of how, if you're a business, how in Ontario, how are you going to sell more in Quebec or in Alberta? Why are there these barriers? So, for example, if you're a construction company, and this is a sector where productivity is really hampered. So if we have a more productive construction sector, we can build faster, cheaper. So one barrier to a productive construction sector is when you're facing different rules in different provinces, the rules that apply to the construction sites, or even, what kind of first aid kit you're gonna have, right? So if you move workers, they have to comply, or managers, they have to comply with different rules depending on the province. That doesn't make for a very, different construction codes across the country. That doesn't make for a very productive use of our construction sectors and our skilled workers in that sector. That's one example. And I have to say that is one sector where there's been a lot of progress in terms of these barriers. We're harmonizing a lot of, finally, after 30 years, we decide, hey, this is something that could really help us. And we're starting just this year to harmonize some of these rules among provinces. But another one that is very frustrating, another example of barriers are the ones concerning truck transportation. It's crazy. So 8 years ago, maybe I shouldn't use that word, but it's frustrating. So I think it was 8 years ago, finally, after trying to do it through different trade agreements, we had an agreement internal trade in 1995, and then another agreement in 2007. So finally, in 2008, provincial and federal transport ministers, hooray, they got together in Winnipeg, and they agreed on what the barriers were, like 10 sets of barriers, very detailed, and that they would try to harmonize, the type of tires and wheel size for different trucks, right? Can they be harmonized across the country? That's one example. And they agreed on what they were, and they agreed to try to remove them. But here we are, 7 years later. This is so crucial for our economy, and that relates to our diversification agenda. If it's not north-south, we're going to have to be a lot better east-west in terms of transporting goods and so on. So now we're back at this and saying, oh, maybe that was really important. And now we're trying to do it. But so the length of time is really frustrating. But a lot of the barriers have been identified, the ones I mentioned, for example. And they're being, I guess, they're chiseling away at them. But now there's definitely a new sense of urgency. And you've seen a number of provinces saying, if it's good enough for Nova Scotia, it's good enough for Ontario. Let's just deal with it on that basis. That's sometimes too simplistic. And the federal government has just announced, for example, that, if it's good enough, if this inspection or that inspection for this or that good is good enough for a province, it's good enough for the federal government. So I think we're starting to find shortcuts now, whereas before we were just starting from the basis of, let's try to, we're all different and we have to try to maintain our differences because of this, because of that, because it helps our little sector. So now I think the momentum is finally towards more cooperation and more acceptance of each other's standards so that we can facilitate this trade.
Let's talk a bit more for our final question about this sense of urgency that I think we're all feeling right now. We have a window of opportunity. It feels in some ways like all of this chaos has kind of woken a giant, so to speak, and the potential is there. What happens if we let this opportunity slip through the cracks? What are you seeing from some of your research at CD Howe?
Well, already in the first Trump presidency, we published a study, we did a very detailed study by one of our fellow Dan Churiak that looked at, okay, what if the United States imposed a 10% tariff on everything from everywhere in the world? And the answer was, the implications were quite bleak for us. So we were looking at over time, there would be an immediate bigger shock than what would happen over time, because over time, we can rally our own economic capacities and provide what the U.S. is, a lot of what the U.S. is providing us now, but at a higher costs. So over time, we'd be looking at maybe a 2.5-3% decline, one-off in standards of living. So it's like those maybe 3% wage increases, if you're lucky that you've had over a year. They're disappearing, overnight, essentially, and you can't get them back. So that's a big drop in standard of living for Canadians, and that's what we're facing if we can't get the United States to walk back the rhetoric. And the good news is they've been walking back a lot because it hurts them, as I mentioned. They realize that. I don't think they're interested in a collapsing world economy, which means also a decline of standards of living in the U.S., a lower number of jobs, et cetera. I don't think they're interested in that. So that means eventually they have to work with partners like us, but it also means that the partners have to be ready to work with them. They're concerned about their trade deficit. They're concerned about the U.S. industrial base. They're concerned about defense and security. And the reason you see all these questions, Canada or the Canadian governments, proactively trying to answer those concerns on the part of the United States is because that's what's going to get us, if we're able to do that, to a better deal that will avoid this pretty catastrophic scenario that we're facing otherwise.
How optimistic are you that we are going to seize this moment?
That depends on the week. So I think right now I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because there are teams actually talking to each other, and as we'll note in a paper that we'll release next week, the teams are below the political level. They're like the technocrats. They understand the issues. Okay, what's the mandate? More secure border. Let's work on that. What's the mandate? Try to help the U.S. reduce its trade balance while still having a thriving trade relationship. Let's work on that, right? So I think that we're there. The U.S. is negotiating at least framework agreements with a large number of countries under a fairly artificial deadline, as some of these things are of July 9. I think we're one of those countries. And we have a lot to offer to them. And so I think it's our chance to get in there and saying this is how we can improve the relationship with a new deal. That's going to be not just a trade deal, a broader trade and security deal that will respond to some of your concerns. And within that, we can operate with freer trade than what you're proposing right now, and hopefully as free as we had before the crisis erupted.
Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today. For people who want more information, where is the best place for them to go?
Well, the best place to start is our website, cdhowe.org, and you can find all of our work there, hopefully giving practical advice to governments on how to raise standards of living for Canadians. by improving policies in a range of areas that we work on: housing, inflation, energy, and of course trade. And we welcome feedback. So, but hopefully you'll find the ideas interesting. But we're always open to examine better ones.
Excellent. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.